Some of these places will kill you. Others just make you wish they had. Today, I'm counting down 10 tourist spots you should genuinely never visit. Places where the danger isn't a warning label. It's the whole point. 10. The plank walk that's basically a dare carved into a cliff. On the southern peak of Huashan, one of China's 5 sacred mountains, there's a path. And I use that word loosely. It's a series of wooden planks, each one roughly the width of a cutting board, bolted directly into the face of a sheer granite cliff. Below them, not a slope, not a ridge, a vertical drop of around 2,000 meters. That's taller than 6 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. The mountain itself has been a place of Taoist pilgrimage for over 2,000 years. Monks used this path. Monks who had presumably made peace with the concept of dying. The original route wasn't built for tourism. It was built because the monks needed to get somewhere, the cliff was in the way, and at some point someone decided planks were the solution. Here's what the modern version looks like. You strap on a harness at the base. You clip that harness to a steel cable running along the rock face. And then you shuffle sideways along a ledge that, in places, is genuinely no wider than your foot, with nothing to your left but open air and the distant suggestion of a valley floor. The cable is the only thing between you and the drop. The harness clips to it. You move the clip yourself, manually, every time you reach a post. So there are moments, brief, specific moments, where you're unclipped, where the only thing keeping you on the mountain is friction and the particular quality of your grip. The path leads to a small tea house near the summit. Someone built a tea house up there. Someone carries supplies to it. People sit in it and drink tea after shuffling along a cliff face with a 2,000-meter drop, and by all accounts, they find this relaxing. Now, here's the thing that should probably be in a headline somewhere. China doesn't publish official death statistics for the Huashan Plank Walk. There's no verified annual fatality count. What exists are accounts, forum posts, documented incidents, enough to confirm people have died here, not enough to tell you how many. The government's position appears to be that the harness system makes it safe. The harness system that requires you to manually unclip yourself at regular intervals on a cliff face. Around 100,000 people attempt this walk every year. That number is not a typo. 100,000. The path is genuinely, actively, currently popular. There are queues. People wait in line to shuffle along a plank 2,000 meters above the ground. And the pictures. The pictures taken from the plank walk, someone clinging to a chain, feet on a ledge the size of a paperback book, a valley so far below it looks painted. Those images have circulated so widely that they become one of the most recognized photographs of extreme tourism anywhere in the world, which is, in itself, part of why 100,000 people a year go. Some people get to the first exposed section, look at the drop, and turn around. That's the sensible move. That's the move that requires no explanation to anyone. The ones who keep going describe it as one of the most terrifying and most beautiful experiences of their lives, often in the same sentence, as if those two things are not in contradiction, but are, in fact, the same thing. The tea house is still open. The path is still open. The cable is still there. And every year, 100,000 people clip their harness to it and shuffle out over nothing, because the view from the other side is supposed to be worth it. Worth it is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Number 9. Mount Washington, where the weather comes to win. 372 kilometers per hour. That's the wind speed recorded at the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire on the 12th of April, 1934. For 62 years, it was the fastest surface wind speed ever measured anywhere on Earth. A Category 5 hurricane needs sustained winds of around 250 kilometers per hour to earn that classification. The summit of Mount Washington beat that by nearly half again, on a Tuesday in April in New Hampshire. The mountain is only 1,917 meters tall. That's not Everest. That's not even particularly dramatic by global standards. There are ski resorts sitting higher than that. But height isn't what makes Mount Washington dangerous. It's position. The summit sits at the convergence of 3 major storm tracks, in a gap in the presidential range that funnels and accelerates wind the way a pinched hose accelerates water. The mountain essentially acts as a collector of the worst weather the northeastern United States can produce, concentrating it at a single point. The Summit Weather Observatory has recorded every category of severe weather except tropical cyclones, every category, snow in every month of the year, rime ice that encases the buildings in a shell several centimeters thick, visibility that drops to 0 in minutes, temperatures that, combined with wind chill, can reach the equivalent of negative 50 degrees Celsius or lower. And there's a road to the top, the Mount Washington Auto Road, 8 kilometers long, carved into the mountain in 1861, which means people were driving up this thing before most cars had proper brakes. One side of the road is the mountain. The other side is a drop of several hundred meters with, in many sections, no guardrail. The road has a grade that hits 12% on the steepest sections. Buses run it. People drive their own cars up it. The bumper sticker you get at the top reads, "This car climbed Mount Washington," which is either a badge of honor or an explanation of why the car now needs new brake pads. But yeah, the road is arguably the least dangerous way to be up there. The hiking trails are something else entirely. There are more than 30 trails on the mountain, and the above tree-line section, the exposed section, where the weather hits you directly, is roughly 4 kilometers of open alpine terrain with no shelter and conditions that can change from clear to whiteout in under 15 minutes. The Appalachian Mountain Club maintains huts in the area and publishes weather data specifically because people underestimate this mountain constantly. It looks approachable. It looks like a hill. It is not a hill. More than 150 people have died on Mount Washington since records began. The causes include hypothermia, falls, exhaustion, and being caught in weather that arrived faster than anyone expected. Some of those deaths happened in summer. Some happened within sight of the summit. The weather observatory at the top is staffed year-round. A small team of meteorologists lives up there through the winter, rotating shifts, weeks at a time, in conditions they describe, with some understatement, as challenging. They measure the wind, they log the temperature, they do their jobs while the mountain does what it always does, which is try to make being there as difficult as possible. The observatory has been continuously staffed since 1932. That's over 90 years of people choosing, deliberately, to live at the top of the worst weather in the northeastern hemisphere, because someone needs to be there to measure it. The summit itself has a visitor center, a cafeteria, and a gift shop. On a clear day in summer, it's genuinely crowded. Tourists eat sandwiches at the top of a mountain that holds a wind speed record that stood for 6 decades, wearing t-shirts, taking photos completely unbothered. The weather can change that in about the time it takes to finish the sandwich. At number 8, Madidi National Park, Bolivia. Madidi is not a park that tolerates carelessness. It covers around 19,000 square kilometers in the upper Amazon basin in northwestern Bolivia, roughly the size of Slovenia for reference, and it contains more species of bird than the entire continental United States, more species of mammal than almost anywhere on Earth, more plant species than most countries. By raw biodiversity count, it's one of the most complex ecosystems ever documented. That complexity is, precisely, the problem. Most national parks have dangerous things in them. Madidi has dangerous things in concentrations that researchers have described with genuine unease as unusual even by Amazonian standards. Jaguars, caimans, anacondas, bullet ants, whose sting is ranked at the top of the Schmidt Pain Index, the scale entomologists use to measure insect sting severity, described by the researcher who developed it as pure, intense, brilliant pain, like walking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch nail embedded in your heel. That's a direct quote from a scientist who studies pain for a living. But the insects and the animals aren't actually the most documented hazard. It's the plants. Madidi contains a significant number of plant species with spines, toxins, or irritants that cause severe reactions on skin contact. Some cause rashes that develop into open sores. Some cause infections that, in the humidity and heat of the jungle, escalate faster than most people expect. A cut that would heal in days in a temperate climate can become seriously infected within hours in Madidi's environment. The jungle here doesn't just contain things that can hurt you. It's an environment that actively accelerates the consequences of being hurt. Getting lost is not a recoverable situation. There are no roads through most of the park. Rescue, if it comes by river or by air. The nearest town of any size is Rurrenabaque, accessible from La Paz by a flight on a small propeller aircraft over the Andes, a flight that is, itself, listed on several aviation risk assessments as one of the more statistically eventful short-haul routes in South America. So, the journey to get to the dangerous park involves a separately dangerous journey. Guided tours exist and are strongly advised, not as a polite suggestion, but as a genuine functional requirement. Local guides from the indigenous communities in and around the park carry knowledge about which plants to avoid, which paths flood, which river sections are navigable, and which are not. Without that knowledge, the park's density, vegetation so thick in places that visibility drops to a few meters, becomes genuinely disorienting within a short distance of any trail. The park was established in 2000 in its current form, partly to protect the territory of several indigenous communities who have lived within it for generations. Those communities have managed to live there because they know it. They know which berries don't kill you. They know where the water is safe. They know how the flooding moves through the lowland sections in wet season. That knowledge took generations to accumulate. Tourists arrive with a backpack and a week. The wildlife photography that comes out of Matadi is extraordinary. Tapirs, giant river otters, spectacled bears, harpy eagles. The images look like something from a nature documentary, which is accurate because nature documentaries have been filmed there, with professional crews, full medical support, and local guides who've spent their lives in the jungle. There are travelers who go independently. Some of them are fine. Some of them require evacuation. The park doesn't publish incident statistics in any centralized form, which means the actual frequency of serious situations is genuinely unknown, which is, in its own way, a data point. What's known is this: Matadi is not a park that scales to the visitor. It doesn't adjust. It doesn't make exceptions. It's been doing what it does for millions of years, and the addition of tourists to the ecosystem has not noticeably changed its operating principles. The river entry from Rurrenabaque on a clear morning is one of the most visually striking approaches to any natural area on Earth. The water is calm. The canopy is dense and green and enormous. Macaws cross overhead. It looks genuinely like paradise. It's just that paradise in this case has bullet ants. 7. Lake Natron, Tanzania, the lake that calcifies sodium carbonate. That's the mechanism. Lake Natron in northern Tanzania sits over a series of volcanic hot springs that leach natron, a naturally occurring salt compound, into the water continuously, raising the pH to somewhere between 9 and 10.5. That's roughly the same alkalinity as ammonia. The surface temperature in the shallower sections reaches 60 degrees Celsius in the dry season. The lake is not trying to be hospitable. It has never tried. The water is red. Not reddish, not rust-tinted. A deep, saturated crimson in the central sections caused by the halophilic microorganisms, salt-loving bacteria and algae that are among the only things on Earth that can actually survive in it. From above, in photographs taken by small aircraft, it looks less like a lake and more like something that belongs inside a body. It is approximately 56 kilometers long and about 14 kilometers wide, roughly the footprint of Greater London, filled with caustic red brine. Photographer Nick Brandt visited the lake around 2013 and found something that stopped him. Animals, birds, bats, a fish eagle, dead on the shoreline, their bodies coated in a white mineral crust. The sodium carbonate had begun calcifying them where they lay, or possibly where they fell, preserving their posture and their form in hardening mineral deposits. Brandt photographed them and, because the images were so striking, repositioned some of them into poses, perched on branches, standing upright, to make the effect more visible. The resulting photographs circulated widely. Calcified animals posed as if frozen mid-motion, staring out of a blood-red lake. The calcification process is real. The posing was Brandt's artistic choice, which he disclosed. Both things are true simultaneously. So here's what actually happens to animals that enter the water. The alkaline brine strips oils and fats from skin and feathers, causing chemical burns. Most animals that accidentally enter the lake don't survive the exposure. The mineral deposits then begin accumulating on the body relatively quickly in the right conditions. It's not instantaneous, not a flash freeze, but the dry season heat and the mineral concentration work together fast enough that the results are visible within a meaningful time frame. And yet, the lake is one of the most important flamingo breeding grounds on Earth. Between 1.5 and 2.5 million lesser flamingos nest here annually. That's the majority of the global lesser flamingo population, gathering at a lake that would kill most other animals that tried to use it. The flamingo's thick, scaly skin resists the caustic water. Their legs are adapted to tolerate it. They wade through brine that would chemically burn unprotected human skin in under an hour, building mud nests on the shallow flats, raising chicks, doing flamingo things completely unbothered. The lake protects them precisely because nothing else can be there. No predators can follow them in. The caustic water is the fence. If you're enjoying the video, drop a like and a comment. It really does help the channel out. And coming up, we're leaving the lake and heading somewhere that doesn't just have dangerous conditions, it has a government that actively enforces your right to be kept away from it. Tourists do visit Lake Natron. There are basic camps on the shore. The Maasai have lived around the lake for generations and know how to navigate it. Guided walks to the Flamingo Flats exist, with strict instructions about where not to step and what not to touch. The lake itself is accessible. It's in a remote section of the Arusha region, several hours from the nearest major road. But it's not closed. What it is indifferent. Lake Natron does not adjust its chemistry for visitors. It doesn't post warnings. It has been doing exactly what it does for millions of years, and the flamingos are the only guests it was ever designed to accommodate. The Ol Doinyo Lengai volcano sits at the southern end of the lake. Active, the only volcano on Earth that erupts natrocarbonatite lava. A lava so low in temperature and so fluid that it runs like water and turns white within hours of hitting the air. The volcano feeds the lake. The lake feeds the flamingos. The whole system is locked together in a logic that has nothing to do with human comfort. Standing at the shoreline, the smell of the minerals hits before anything else. Sharp, chemical, entirely unwelcoming. The flamingos don't seem to notice. 6. The Danakil Depression, Earth's least hospitable address, below sea level. That's where this starts. The Danakil Depression in northeastern Ethiopia sits at around 125 meters below sea level at its lowest point, in the Afar Triangle, where 3 tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart from each other. The ground here is not stable in any meaningful sense. It's a place where the planet is actively splitting open, and the surface reflects that in the most literal way possible. The average annual temperature is around 34 degrees Celsius. That's the average, not the peak, not the extreme. The average across the whole year, including nights. It holds a credible claim to being the hottest permanently inhabited place on Earth. The Afar people have lived in and around the depression for generations, which is one of those facts that sits with you for a moment before you move on. What the depression contains beyond the heat is a collection of geological features that look like they were designed to be on another planet. Erta Ale is an active shield volcano in the northern section with a persistent lava lake, one of only a handful of permanent lava lakes on Earth that has been continuously active for over a century. You can walk to the crater rim. People do. At night, guided groups hike up to watch the lava churn in the dark, which is either one of the most extraordinary things a person can witness or a profoundly poor decision, depending on how the volcano is behaving that particular evening. Then, there are the hydrothermal fields at Dalal, bright yellow sulfur deposits, acid pools in greens and oranges, salt formations that push up through the crust in shapes that have no obvious comparison to anything else on the surface of this planet. The pools are not decorative. The acidity in some sections approaches pH 0. Battery acid sits around pH 1. The colors are produced by the mineral content of the water, and the water itself will cause severe chemical burns on contact. There are no fences. There are no barriers. You walk among them on a crust of salt that is, in places, thin enough to crack underfoot. In 2012, a group of tourists and their Ethiopian guides were attacked by armed gunmen in the Danakil Depression. 5 tourists were killed. 4 were abducted. The Ethiopian government responded by requiring armed military escorts for all tourist groups visiting the region. That requirement is still in place, so the current experience of visiting the Danakil Depression involves traveling with soldiers because the landscape alone was apparently insufficient deterrent. Tours still run, regularly. From the town of Mekelle, groups depart on multi-day expeditions into the depression. 4-wheel drive convoys, armed escort, camping in the heat. The tours are not cheap, and they are not comfortable, and people book them months in advance. The Afar region has also been subject to periodic travel advisories from multiple governments due to ongoing regional instability, which adds a layer of risk that exists entirely separately from the geological one. So there are, at minimum, 2 independent categories of danger operating simultaneously: the Earth trying to kill you, and occasionally other people. What draws people beyond the obvious visual spectacle is something harder to articulate. Dalal was recorded as the hottest weather station on Earth for a period in the mid-20th century. The salt flats stretch for kilometers, white and flat and enormous, with camel caravans still crossing them. The Afar have mined salt from the depression for centuries, cutting blocks by hand and loading them onto camels, the same method used for generations. That image, the camel caravans on the salt flats with the hydrothermal fields in the distance, is one of the more genuinely surreal things a camera can capture on this planet. The lava lake at Erta Ale has no formal viewing platform. The crater rim is uneven volcanic rock. You stand at the edge and look down at liquid rock churning maybe 30 meters below, and the heat coming off it is physical. A wall of it, pressing back. Guides know where to stand. First-timers don't, which is precisely why the guides exist. The depression is accessible. It is documented. It has TripAdvisor reviews. It is also a place where the ground is acidic. The air is sulfurous. The temperature rarely drops below 20 degrees even at midnight. An active volcano has been erupting continuously for over 100 years, and armed escorts are legally required to enter. All of that is true at the same time. The Skeleton Coast, Namibia. Number 5. The Bushmen called it the land God made in anger. The Portuguese sailors who first mapped it called it the Gates of Hell. Neither group was being dramatic. The Skeleton Coast runs for roughly 500 kilometers along the northwestern edge of Namibia, where the Namib Desert, one of the oldest and driest deserts on Earth, meets the South Atlantic Ocean. The Benguela Current pushes cold water up from the Antarctic along this coastline, and when that cold water hits the warm desert air, it produces a fog so dense and so persistent that ships navigating the coast couldn't see the shore until they were already on it. Hundreds of shipwrecks line the beach. Some are old wooden hulls, barely visible above the sand. Some are 20th century steel vessels, rusting in the open air, sitting on a beach with no port, no town, and no road within practical distance. If your ship went down here, you survived the wreck and you made it to shore. You then faced the Namib Desert at your back. No fresh water, no food, no way to signal for help in any era before radio. The coast didn't offer rescue. It offered a slower version of the same outcome, which is, presumably, how it earned the name. The wrecks are still there. The Edward Bolen ran aground in 1910 and now sits several hundred meters inland. The desert has grown around it over the past century, the sand advancing until the ship is no longer even at the waterline. It's a steel vessel sitting in the middle of a desert, rusting, surrounded by nothing. That image, a large ship, clearly built for open ocean, stranded in sand dunes, is one of those things that takes a moment to process even when you're looking directly at it. The northern section of the Skeleton Coast is a national park, accessible only by small charter aircraft. There are no roads in. There are a small number of exclusive camps, genuinely remote, genuinely expensive, fly-in only, that operate within the park under strict concession agreements with the Namibian government. The southern section has a gravel road, the C-34, which runs along the coast and is accessible by 4-wheel drive. But accessible is relative. The nearest fuel stop can be several hundred kilometers away. Breakdowns in this environment are not inconveniences, they are emergencies. The wildlife is extraordinary and also, in its way, a measure of how hostile the environment is. Brown hyenas, desert-adapted lions, a genetically distinct population that has learned to survive on coastal resources, eating seals and beach-cast whale carcasses, which is not what lions are supposed to eat and is a direct result of how little else is available. Cape fur seals gather at Cape Cross in numbers that reach into the hundreds of thousands. The colony there is one of the largest in the world, roughly 300,000 animals on a single beach, the noise and the smell carrying for kilometers. The fog rolls in most mornings, cold and thick, turning the wrecks and the dunes into shapes in gray. By midday, it usually burns off and the desert reasserts itself. Heat, silence, sand the color of rust. There have been documented cases of tourists driving the southern coastal road and becoming stranded when vehicles failed in remote sections. Rescue in this environment depends on whether anyone knows your route and timeline, and whether help can reach you before the conditions make the situation unrecoverable. The park authority strongly advises registering travel plans before entering remote sections. Some people do, some people don't. The San people, the Bushmen who named it, understood the coast for what it was before any European ship arrived. The name predates the shipwrecks. It predates the colonial maps. They looked at this stretch of coastline and named it accurately without needing the wrecks as evidence. The wrecks just confirmed the assessment. There are travelers who drive the Skeleton Coast and describe it as one of the most visually striking landscapes on Earth. The combination of desert and ocean and fog and rust and bone is genuinely unlike anywhere else. The Cape Cross seal colony alone is a spectacle that has no real equivalent. The Edouard Bolin sitting in its sand dunes is a photograph that people travel specifically to take. But the coast hasn't changed its nature to accommodate any of that. It's the same coast it always was. The fog still comes in. The current still runs cold. The desert still sits at the back of the beach, waiting. The bones in the name aren't metaphorical. They're still there. 4. North Sentinel Island, where the isolation is absolute. In November 2018, a 26-year-old American named John Allen Chau paid local fishermen to take him by boat to an island in the Andaman Sea. He'd been planning the trip for years. He kept a journal. He wanted to make contact with the people who lived there. The fishermen dropped him at the edge of the shallows and watched from a distance. Chau waded toward the beach. The Sentinelese shot him with arrows. The fishermen watched his body being dragged along the sand. That's what happened. No ambiguity, no disputed account. The Indian Coast Guard confirmed it. The fishermen reported it. Chau's journal entries, recovered later, showed he'd been turned back by arrow fire on previous approach attempts during the same trip and returned anyway. North Sentinel Island sits in the Bay of Bengal, part of the Andaman and Nicobar archipelago administered by India. It's roughly the size of Manhattan, about 59 square kilometers of dense forest, with a coral reef surrounding it that makes approach by larger vessels difficult. From the air or from a boat at safe distance, it looks like any other tropical island. Green, dense, quiet. The Sentinelese have lived there in complete isolation for a period that anthropologists estimate at somewhere between 30,000 and 60,000 years. That number deserves a moment. 60,000 years. Agriculture as a human concept is roughly 12,000 years old. The Sentinelese predate it by a factor of 5, and have had no meaningful contact with the outside world across that entire span. They are, by most assessments, the most isolated human population on Earth. We know almost nothing verified about them. Population estimates range from somewhere around 15 individuals to several hundred. The range itself tells you how little data exists. We don't know their language beyond the fact that it appears unrelated to any documented language family. We don't know their social structure, their beliefs, their internal history. What we know is what can be observed from helicopter distance. They build shelters, they fish, they have bows and arrows, and they have made their position on outside contact consistently and unambiguously clear across every documented approach attempt spanning more than a century. The Indian government has, since 1996, formally protected the Sentinelese right to refuse contact, It is illegal under Indian law to approach within 3 nautical miles of the island. That's not a suggestion. Violation carries criminal penalties. The law exists not to protect outsiders from the Sentinelese, but to protect the Sentinelese from outsiders, specifically from the diseases that isolated populations have no immunity to, the same dynamic that devastated indigenous populations across the Americas and the Pacific when contact was made. A common cold introduced to a population with 0 prior exposure can move through it with catastrophic speed. The Indian government's position is that contact would likely kill them, not might, would. Chau's case prompted a significant legal and ethical debate about whether the fisherman who transported him should face charges, whether his family had standing to recover his body, and whether any attempt at retrieval was even possible without risking the same outcome. The Indian authorities ultimately decided against any attempt to recover his remains. His body stayed on the island. The legal case against the fisherman was eventually dropped. There have been other approach attempts over the decades by anthropologists, by the Indian government itself during earlier contact programs in the 1970s and 80s, by journalists, by the simply curious. The outcomes have ranged from arrows fired in warning to arrows fired with clear intent. One National Geographic expedition in the 1970s made brief contact. Gifts were left, the Sentinelese took some and rejected others, and the interaction ended without violence. That remains one of the few documented non-hostile encounters on record. But yeah, the contact program was eventually abandoned. The Indian government concluded that the Sentinelese had made their preference clear enough across enough encounters that continuing to push was both dangerous and, frankly, disrespectful of a decision being communicated as plainly as it could be communicated without a shared language. They don't want contact. They have never wanted contact. They have enforced that position with consistency across every documented encounter for over 100 years. The island sits in the Andaman Sea, green and dense and entirely self-contained, and the people on it have built a complete human world in there. Language, culture, knowledge, history, that no outsider has ever accessed, and, under current law, no outsider is permitted to try. What's in there stays in there. Snake Island, off the coast of Brazil. Number 3. Roughly 33 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo state, there's an island called Ilha da Queimada Grande. It's about 43 hectares, roughly the size of 43 football pitches, of Atlantic forest vegetation, rocky coastline, and an abandoned lighthouse. It looks, from a boat at distance, like a fairly ordinary small island. Overgrown, quiet, unremarkable. It has an estimated population of between 2,000 and 4,000 golden lancehead pit vipers. That works out to somewhere between 1 snake per square meter and 1 snake per 2 square meters, depending on which population estimate you use and which section of the island you're standing in. The golden lancehead is found nowhere else on Earth. It evolved in isolation on this island after it was cut off from the mainland by rising sea levels somewhere between 10,000 and 11,000 years ago, and it has spent that entire period becoming, by several measures, one of the most dangerous snakes in the Western Hemisphere. The venom is the specific issue, not just potent, structurally unusual. It's fast-acting hemotoxic venom that causes tissue breakdown, kidney failure, intestinal bleeding, and necrosis at the bite site. Researchers who study it describe it as capable of causing flesh to begin breaking down around the wound within hours. The lancehead genus is responsible for the majority of serious snakebite incidents in Brazil, and the golden lancehead's venom is estimated to be 3 to 5 times more potent than its mainland relatives. It evolved that way because its primary prey, migratory birds that land on the island briefly, can fly away. The snake needs the venom to work fast. It does. The Brazilian Navy controls access. Landing on Ilha da Queimada Grande is prohibited without authorization from the Instituto Chico Mendes de Conservação da Biodiversidade, the Brazilian federal conservation body. Researchers with approved permits can visit. The Navy conducts periodic maintenance visits to the lighthouse. That's essentially the full list of people who go there legitimately. There are accounts, unverified and passed through local fishermen over decades, of people who landed on the island without authorization. The accounts don't end well. The most widely circulated story involves a fisherman who supposedly came ashore to collect bananas, was bitten multiple times, made it back to his boat, and was found dead in a pool of blood shortly after. The story is unverified. The conditions that would produce that outcome, however, are entirely consistent with what documented about the island and the snake. The lighthouse was staffed until some point in the mid-20th century when the Brazilian government automated it. The last lighthouse keeper's family, the account that circulates most frequently, reportedly died on the island after snakes entered the house through the windows. This story is also unverified. What's documented is that the lighthouse is no longer staffed, and the reason given is the snake population. The golden lancehead is also critically endangered. The island is its entire habitat. Illegal collection for the black market, the snake commands significant prices among collectors, and for venom research, has reduced the population from historical estimates, and the species has no backup location. The only place it exists is the place humans are prohibited from entering, which is, in a specific and somewhat grim way, probably the main reason it still exists at all. Researchers who have conducted authorized visits describe the experience of moving through the island's vegetation with considerable care. The snakes are arboreal as well as ground-dwelling, which means they're in the trees and shrubs as well as underfoot. Looking down is not sufficient. The island requires attention in 3 dimensions simultaneously. The lighthouse still stands. It's visible from boats passing at a safe distance, rising above the tree line, automated, functional, surrounded by several thousand of the most venomous snakes in the Americas. Someone periodically has to go in there and service it. That person receives, one assumes, a fairly specific briefing before departure. The island sits in the Atlantic, 33 kilometers from one of the most densely populated coastlines in South America, and it is effectively a nature reserve maintained by the lethality of its sole resident species. No fences required, no signage necessary. The snakes handle it. There are 3 entries left on this list, and the places coming up make Snake Island look like a minor inconvenience. The next one doesn't just have a dangerous environment, it has a crater that's been on fire for over 50 years, and nobody has managed to put it out. 2. The door to hell has been burning since before the internet existed. In the Karakum Desert in central Turkmenistan, there is a crater roughly 70 meters wide and 30 meters deep, about the footprint of a large apartment block punched straight into the desert floor, that has been on fire continuously since around 1971, 50 plus years. The fire has not gone out. Nobody has put it out. The crater sits there in the middle of one of the most remote and least visited countries on Earth, burning, and it has been doing this since the Nixon administration. The official name is the Darvaza gas crater. The name people actually use is the door to hell. Both are accurate. Here's what happened. As best as the documented record shows, Soviet geologists were drilling for natural gas in the area. The Karakum Desert sits over significant hydrocarbon reserves, when the ground beneath their drilling rig collapsed into a cavern. The rig went in. The collapse opened a large crater, and natural gas began venting from it in quantities significant enough to be a concern. The decision was made to ignite the gas deliberately, on the theory that it would burn off within a few weeks and the problem would resolve itself. That was approximately 1971. The gas did not burn off. The crater has been venting and burning continuously ever since, fed by natural gas reserves that have shown no sign of depletion across 5 decades of constant combustion. The flames at the rim reach several meters high. The glow is visible from a significant distance in the dark. Travelers approaching across the flat desert describe seeing it from many kilometers away, an orange light sitting on the horizon where there is nothing else for the light to be coming from. The heat at the crater's edge is substantial enough that extended proximity is uncomfortable, and the sulfurous smell of the burning gas carries on the wind. There are no barriers, no fencing, no formal viewing platform. You drive across the desert, you park, and you walk to the edge of a 70-meter burning crater in the ground and look down into it. Turkmenistan is not a straightforward country to visit. It consistently ranks among the most closed and restrictive nations on Earth. Visas are difficult to obtain, independent travel is heavily constrained, and foreign visitors are often required to use state-approved guides. The country has an authoritarian government that controls most aspects of public life and limits outside access with considerable thoroughness. Getting to the door to hell requires navigating that system first, which functions as a significant filter on who actually arrives there. The former president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow, ordered the crater to be extinguished in 2010, citing environmental and economic concerns. The burning gas represented a resource being wasted. Nothing happened. In 2022, he reportedly issued a similar directive again. As of the most recent available information, the crater is still burning. Geologists and engineers who have studied the site note that extinguishing it is not straightforwardly simple. The gas supply is not from a single identifiable source that can be capped. It's diffuse, coming from the broader geological formation beneath the crater. Sealing the crater itself would require significant engineering work in a remote location with limited infrastructure, and there's no guarantee it would stop the venting rather than simply redirect it. So, the practical path to putting it out is not obvious, which is presumably part of why 2 presidential orders have produced no result. Canadian explorer George Karounis became the first documented person to descend into the crater in 2013, rappelling down to the floor to collect soil samples for microbial research. He wore a heat-resistant suit and a respirator. The samples he collected contained living microorganisms, bacteria that had adapted to survive in the crater's extreme conditions. Life in a burning gas crater in the Turkmen Desert. Finding a way. The crater sits in one of the most sparsely populated regions of one of the most isolated countries in Central Asia, burning through the night and through the day, visible from the air on satellite imagery as a persistent heat signature in the middle of the desert. The geologists who lit it expected it to last weeks. It has now burned for longer than most of the people reading about it have been alive. And the number 1 spot on this list makes the door to hell look, by comparison, almost manageable, because at least the door to hell stays in one place. 1. Ilha de Queimada Grande already burned. This one just burns you back. Wait, we covered the island. This is the final entry, the one that earns the top spot. 1. The place the human spirit cannot seem to leave alone. Permit me to restate what we've covered. A cliff walk with no verified death count. A mountain that holds a wind speed record from 1934. A jungle that infects cuts within hours. A lake with the pH of ammonia. A desert where armed escorts are legally required. A coastline named for its body count before the ships even arrived. An island protected by the most isolated humans on Earth. A snake island with 1 viper per square meter. A crater burning since the Nixon administration. And yet, none of those places has drawn more documented human attempts to reach it, more philosophical writing about why people go, more raw footage of individuals visibly terrified and going anyway, than the Huashan Plank Walk. So we come back to it, not as a repeat, as a reckoning. The path is not a trail, not a track. It's a sequence of iron stakes driven into granite, connected by chains, with wooden planks bolted across them in sections wide enough for one person moving carefully. In places, the planks run out entirely, and you're stepping on the iron stakes themselves, each one projecting maybe 30 centimeters from the rock face, with nothing below for approximately 2,000 meters. That's roughly the height of 6.5 Eiffel Towers, stacked, below your feet. The harness system was introduced at some point in the early 2000s as visitor numbers grew. Before that, people did this with no harness at all. Photographs from earlier decades show tourists in ordinary clothes, no safety equipment, shuffling along the same planks with nothing between them and the drop but their own grip and their own nerve. The harness clips to a steel cable. You move the clip yourself at each anchor post. There are moments of transition, brief, specific, documented moments, where you are unclipped from the cable entirely. Chinese authorities do not publish a centralized fatality record for the plank walk. This is not an oversight. Incident data exists in local records, in hospital reports, in accounts from guides and from other visitors, but no official annual figure has been released. What's confirmed, people have died here. The path has a documented history of fatal falls. The exact number is unknown, and the government's position appears to be that the harness system renders the question moot. 100,000 visitors attempt the plank walk annually. That number has held roughly steady across recent years, which means the deaths, however many there have been, have not reduced demand. If anything, the footage has increased it. Videos of people frozen with fear on the cliff face, shuffling in both directions on planks barely wider than a school ruler, clinging to chains while the valley sits 2,000 meters below. Those videos circulate constantly. They are the advertisement. The terror is the draw. There's a tea house near the summit. Someone supplies it. Someone works in it. People who have just completed the plank walk sit in it and drink tea, and by all accounts feel something that is genuinely difficult to name. Not relief exactly, not pride exactly, but something in the space between them that seems to require the specific experience of having been that close to falling and having not fallen. The mountain has been a place of pilgrimage for over 2,000 years. The monks who built the original path were not seeking thrills. They were seeking something else. Proximity to something larger. Access to a place that cost enough to reach that the reaching meant something. The tourists who clip their harnesses to the cable every morning are not monks, but they're after something in the same neighborhood. And that's the thing that puts this at number 1. Not the drop, not the statistics, not the absence of official death records, though that's genuinely unsettling. It's the fact that 100,000 people a year look at a 2,000 meter cliff face with a cutting board wide plank bolted to it and think, yes, that's the one. That's where I need to go. The human spirit can't resist the pull of an experience that is this insane, this beautiful, and this completely unforgettably terrifying. If you thought these spots were terrifying, wait till you see our video on the world's most dangerous roads. Click here, and I'll see you